two-story requirement were, then you deal with those separately because people are having trouble deciding which way to go, and there's likely to be public input that is one way or the other on them. Then that way you don't kill all your other corrections that you wanted to try to get done. That's how we've been approaching it anyhow in the past.
So here's what I'd like to do, unless you guys have thoughts or want to do this. I think some kind of a hybrid, or maybe what you guys are both saying isn't that far off, but that, Brian, you guys as staff work on a ongoing draft of changes for these things that we can consider, but we will continue to accumulate them for an annual potential draft. When we get to a potential change, cumulative change, and then when we get to that point, we will have the ongoing compilation of potential changes that we could sever out the ones that we need to, like you said, and then pass down controversial ones, annually.
That could work too.
Work in that direction.
I can see Brian's point of pulling stuff like this out. I mean, that makes sense to me because I'm sure that this is going to be battled on both sides. The landscape in the two-story was a huge issue when it came down to the library, and I think that they need to be addressed. I think that we need to figure out what it is that truly the statement says in our book of what it truly means, and get it hammered out and have it done with.
If we get to that point, Brian, to help me walk through this, if I'm not mistaken, if we public notice a proposed legislative change that we want to send to council, we can amend that while we're considering it, as long as we've noticed potential legislative changes, ordinance changes, right?
Yeah, I have Angie jump in if she needs to, but we have to provide 35-day notice to the state, DLCD, and doesn't mean we can't make changes along the way after we've noticed them, because that
initial notice, they want redlined what you're going to change, and then once it's adopted by council, then they want the final.
So if we say items
But you
1
can
through
change
10,
it between the two.
Okay, so if we say items 1 through 10, and we notice items 1 through 10, ends up we adopt 1 through 8 with item number 8 being slightly modified, we could do that. That would be okay.
You can do that. I think the question is, what I'm not quite certain of is whether we would propose some language, bring it to you informally for you to review, and then you can point out, yeah, I think that's good, let's go back now and notify DLCD and start the public process. The trouble with that is it's very time-consuming to do it that way.
Well, I think what I'm envisioning here is, as we go through the twice-a-month meetings, we sort of tentatively approve language that would eventually get public noticed. And so we sort of have a pile of, these have been tentatively approved language for potential ordinance changes, and there's a pile of those over here. Then when we get to the annual day, we say, all right, now the month before, we say, yes, this is our stack of we've tentatively approved for public notice. Now we want them officially public noticed as part of this cumulative, like we've always done.
What I'm trying to figure out is how that would look. First of all, I'm not sure we have the ability to bring text amendment review in front of you every meeting. We don't have the ability to do that.
No, we don't.
And we'll be too busy with the actual applications that are on your agenda, and you'll probably bulk at wanting to review at each meeting, because if you have 2 or 3 applications on your agenda, which you may, then that's going to be problematic to get to the text amendment, which will be the last item on the agenda, and it'll be 10 o'clock by the time we get to it. And we won't have had time to develop something each month because we can barely get the applications done to get them on the agenda. And so that's why we only do a code amendment package once a year, because we can't just focus on text amendments. In fact, we barely can ever get to it, because we're right there right now just dealing with the applications. And you'll see it soon, because we're hot and heavy advising constantly on what's being submitted, so it'll meet our code. And so there's less work for us once it's submitted. And now they're all coming in, and you're going to see them real soon. And so I'm trying to figure out how we bring, what, 1 or 2 items each time, because I think that's what you're implying. And I don't know, Angie, do you have any clues on how we would
I mean, I
do
guess
that?
we just make, all I can,
could-
what I do now is manually make notes in the code book. You know, I would see it as something verbal language, proposed language amendments.
Would we not show a
I don't-
strikeout type thing? Here's what the code says today, here's what we're striking out and proposing just for 1 or 2 topics, and so each time we have a set agenda item and they review 1 or 2.
Just look at our code books. Have you noted anything that needs to be potentially amended?
Yeah,
Make it real informal.
Well, like, for instance, today is the 3rd time or 4th time that we've discussed updating that Sunset Western Garden book.
yeah.
And that's
But we
noted.
don't have any
Exactly.
language that we've tentatively approved, and we've already
Right.
talked about it 4 times
But
now.
it's noted in my book, it's noted in our list, you know,
Right.
And
we'll
so-
note that
But if we had some
at a
sort of a
time.
track changes version going that we had said, instead of Sunset Western
Right.
Garden book, we want to have this language, it could forevermore be off the discussion, you know, and safe until we public notice
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Well, let's just see, I mean, we don't have to do anything
We could look
today.
at potentially trying to do that. The
We could
thing
also
is,
share the Word documents with you guys, and if you
Each time we bring it.
start
I'm
making
trying to-
revisions yourself and hand them to us and say,
I'm
this
trying to
is,
figure out how we weed those out when we're going to have to keep that change. Once, let's say you review the Western, okay, our code has that provision in it, we strike it out. It's not even there, okay? So now we've made that correction. Next time we bring 2 or 3 others, we review them, and you slightly amend the language, we make those corrections. Each time we're coming back, we're still going to have those shown, and you're going to have to ignore, because those had been taken care of, and move on to some other ones. I don't know how to not show you what we've already approved, because we have to keep that that change in the language. That's why we usually do it as a package all at once, all these things we've accumulated over a period of time, because we're not losing track of those items. In fact, we kept the list you just went through today, and we've made notes of them, but it's trying to sit down and concentrate, get those changes proposed, and then get them to you all at once seems to be a lot more efficient than every single meeting trying to review 1 or 2 of them. Unless,
Okay, well, let's, right now, all we really have to, on our plates, is the potential landscaping one. So there's only about 6. So we aren't really presented with this problem right now of what I was saying. So let's sort of hold off and continue, working on those 6
See, I-
fixes over time. It doesn't have to be next month.
see,
or
I
anything.
personally thought that the 2-story and potentially the landscaping in the downtown area was important enough, because we're moving headlong into building a new civic building. We don't know yet. It's going out to a vote of the people and stuff. But if we do, I wanted to be prepared with a code change before we get a new building that's going to be subject to the same provisions we had before.
Agreed.
And so I thought we should get that done myself, because we know we're going to face it again potentially soon. And some of our other ones, we could wait until we get this package in front of you that have been mentioned. But that was my attempt here, that's why I brought this effort from the council to you right away, because we're going to be building another public building potentially, and I need to know, because the code doesn't tell me right now whether it has to be 2 stories or not.
Yeah, I think we're really looking for direction on that 7.5%. Is that too high? And then also the language in 1641A, the very first page where it says ensures a minimum of 2 floors.
And quite honestly,
Page 52 of your packet.
if the planning commission is unable to give us specific guidance, you're no different than the city council. Staff will propose something, because we are your professionals. We do have an opinion, and we will propose something to you and let you respond to it. And if you like it, you can pass it on to the city council and say you took a look at it. And it doesn't matter whether it came from staff or whether it was directed by the planning commission, because we think that we do need to respond to at least the 2-story requirement at a minimum. And I think there was enough discussion and feeling that the landscape requirement may be too strict, that we need to respond to that. But right now, gosh, we're going to have a hard time proposing a code for 2-story that we think will have any chance of passing you or the council if we don't know which direction you guys want to go.
So then I would propose that we, and I'm going to look for a vote on this, that we direct staff to attempt to draft up some text amendments, some proposed text amendments just on the landscaping, and that for next month's meeting, we have a work session to discuss specifically the 2-story requirement.
Does that require a second?
Isn't that what we did last week? Of course, you didn't hear, but wasn't that basically what we did last meeting?
The 2-story? Was there a consensus that came out of that on any action items, or?
Not really.
It was left
There's
open.
the 3 of us.
Reading between the lines, I personally have a good gist of where staff would like to go with the 2-story, and I support that. I'm not going to say what it is, but I support it at this point. But until we come to a vote,
Is there any, I mean, it's 8:15 now, we've still got more business items.
I really think that the issue is the landscape. What are we going to do with the landscape downtown? That's going to be the issue. The 2-story, we could talk about that. I had my own feeling about it, but I think it was pretty spelled out in the code of what they wanted. It was just, they tried to get around that because that's not what they wanted to put up. But the real issue here is the landscape, because if you have the requirement of the 7.5, now you're going to have to pull it back from the 0 lot line. You're going to have to make space for that. And I think really that's the piece we need to look at. And I think that downtown, maybe we don't need to require landscape. I mean, it's going to move everything where it needs to be. It's going to make everything look out to the sidewalk like what we want it to look like. So that's my 2 cents for it.
well, my personal thought is I don't want to see the whole downtown landscape thrown out. I personally like judicial landscaping. It's conservatively done. For example, street trees or some small planters that are not outrageous to maintain or keep watered and keep growing. But I think it adds to community livability, landscaping, greenery. So I don't want to just see it cut to 0, thrown out. But if 7.5 is binding, tying our hands, then let's cut it down to something reasonable.
You know, realistically, where I look at it, realistically, our downtown core area, it's 3rd Street to 1st Street. And from Grant, I don't know exactly, but basically Grant to Ivy. And there isn't landscaping in there now, except for on the very edge of the brand-new parking area. And then you go to 3rd Street to the park, and then you've got the round things that are built. with a plant in them. So there really isn't any greenery in that area anyways. So it's not as if we've got, habitat for squirrels and birds and things like that in that 2 block by 4 block or 5 block, whatever, area anyways. So to dance on the head of a needle for something that's really non-existent anyways in that downtown core area, and maybe my mapping is wrong, but that's what I think of when I
Pretty
think of the
close.
DCR
All
area.
right.
Yeah, I think it was over to Elm Street.
Elm,
Okay, yeah.
Elm to Ivy to Fourth, it spreads out on the backside of Fourth just a little bit by the park.
Yeah. So it's not, to me, that, having any landscaping in there in the future is not really what's there now. So, and I think most people like the character of Canby the way it is to some degree right now. And so to sort of create this facade that we're going to have all this landscaping in the downtown area of Canby is a little bit of a, I think.
Well, I'm not referring to having a large space of greenery. I'm just talking basically like they did on First Street, where we took down the big trees on the south side, and then when the new construction was all done, we had some small trees put in on both sides. That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah,
But at that though, I mean, we're back to the same situation that we have here on Second Avenue. Any landscape that's there is public. It's not private. If you really look at it, the buildings are out to there's a little bit around City Hall, but that's public land also. So any landscaping that's here is public landscaping. It's not private landscape. Down to the planter boxes and everything down the street. So, I mean, they make it look nice, and especially with the baskets and everything that they do in the summertime are fabulous, but all that landscape is all public landscape.
But I do think there is, Sean, just to get back to one of your other points, I do think we should have an ordinance change in one direction or another on the two-story requirement. Because we had that, whether you want to call it controversy, a difference of opinion with the city council on whether two stories was required or not required. And that should certainly be clarified. It's an obvious ambiguity, if you will, between the way we read it and they read it.
just, staff can make it wouldn't take us more than 30 minutes to clarify the two-story requirement if we were in agreement that we wanted to require 2 stories. And we can go on about our business, and we don't have to keep holding meetings talking about it. But we're not sure if we clarified it and made it an absolute requirement that it would pass this commission and/or the council. Because we're not really getting clear direction whether there should be exceptions or whether there should be no requirement that dictates 2 stories. But if we're certain that we want 2 stories, we can propose something just like that. It wouldn't take us but 10 minutes to correct the code, and it'll be as clear as bell. And there won't be any controversy over it in the future. And every new building built in the downtown core commercial sub-area will be required to be 2 stories, and there won't be any question about it.
And if they don't want to go in 2-story, don't go into that zone, then go across the
That's right.
highway.
I mean, if that's our druthers, but that's why we're discussing this, is because not everybody seems to be comfortable with that requirement.
I think you're right. I mean, I'm torn on that myself. I don't like to necessarily make the code restrictive to the point where you could turn away business, turn away development, turn away the renewal of some existing
Right.
building over there. But yet, in the downtown area, if you're going to have a 2-story requirement, that's the place you're going to have it. And it's sort of becoming a little bit of the character to some degree, in that area. So it does make sense to some degree there. So I am torn.
We don't have to have unanimous, many codes and Other decisions are made 3-2, 4-1, whatever. And so, you know, but it's always, it's always nice to have direction before we spend the staff time developing specific language if we don't think there's any chance it's going to pass.
I think I would support some form of an ordinance that said either you're 2 stories or you've got some requirement for landscaping if you're going to be 1 story, unless you can show us that sort of the, with an exception that says, unless you can show us that the traditional format for your type of business is a 1-story format. So for instance, you get a Parsons to move in or something like that.
Well-
You never have a pharmacy that's 2 stories. It just doesn't, it's non-existent. I mean, unless you go to New York and it's a skyscraper or something, you know, and it's just on the corner of some building, I think that you'd want to build in some sort of an exception that says, unless, you know, you can demonstrate that the traditional layout for your type of a business does not consist of a 2-story building.
And a good example of that, I know you weren't here, but last time we discussed Canby rental situation.
Right.
And that's, you know, that is not conducive. They want to rebuild, and they're right on the edge of the area, the downtown area where a 2-story would be required. But, you know, what are they going to do? Put John Deere tractors on a 2nd story? Probably not. So that type, you're right, that type of remodel or development really is not conducive to a 2-story building.
Like a grocery store where you've got normally like a 20-foot ceiling. So if you've got a 20-foot ceiling normally, because you've got these high shelves, you're not normally going to have a 2nd floor on top of that, or, you know, those types of things.
But Cutsforth does. This is an example.
Everywhere, or just in the edges?
Well, on the edges, you know, I see what you're saying.
But I guess it is 2 floors. If it's somewhere, it's 2
Yeah.
floors, it's 2 floors.
Yeah.
Well, right, because it doesn't have to be a full 2nd floor.
That's true.
And that's where that combination came in with the FAR and landscape, because the 2 work together. And that's where we got to with the library. Now, the thing that I see, though, in what you're saying about having that ability to say, this business isn't necessarily geared towards a 2nd story, we would go right back to the library issue, because there would be people on both sides of that would argue, one would argue, well, there's a lot of libraries that are 2-story, but the argument is that we don't want a 2-story because it's not functional. So you're back to an argument now, instead of something that's black and white.
Well, I can tell you though, in land use, there is a lot of stuff that's subjective. Everything that says substantial is there.
Yes, there is.
Every time.
Well, I don't know how you craft something that, I don't know how you craft something that says that we would, you know, for our downtown area, we would want a 2nd story, but there might be exceptions, for example,
I mean-
like a drugstore.
Brian, correct me, if the way our floor area ratio is now, that can potentially be met without being 2-story, right?
If there's no on-site parking required. If there's on-site parking, I'm certain
So
it would require 2-story.
the way it is now is somewhat flexible. It's that purpose statement that was the controversial thing that said the proposed FAR in conjunction with the maximum lot coverage ensures a development will be a minimum of 2 floors. That language could be changed to encourages
Or
2
take it
floors,
out.
or completely take that sentence out.
And then we have a slight bit of flexibility
Right.
built in.
But if we specifically want 2-story, then if we go to that development standard section of the downtown zone, where it talks about the FAR, it specifically state must be two-story, and then we could even put a height. I don't know what the standard height of, a maximum height of whatever. So,
That makes a lot of sense to me.
we can
Not
get-
change more than we need to if,
but, I guess the question is,
go ahead.
Canby Riddle would have to build a two-story building.
right, it's
Under
restricted.
today's,
Well, under our proposed change.
Today, could they get enough with the the floor area? They might be able to, and then the only
They
issue,
might.
we could keep the floor area ratio and just clarify that intent statement that was the most controversial thing with the library. So I guess it kind of says, it's just, we want to clarify more if it's, do we want to make it more specific, two-story, or leave it so there's
Wiggle
put
room.
wiggle room?
Well, and where I got with that statement is that they're saying that because of this combination, you're going to have a second floor, you're going to have, and not a second story, and that was part of, and there's on 1641, page 9, being in a construction field, I look at a drawing like this and I see if you're specifying to a second floor and you're giving dimension to it, that means it needs to be there. This is a specific dimension, this is a reference dimension. So those are the things that I looked at when we went around about this the first time. When they're calling out a specific dimension to a second floor, that means they want it there. Not that it's, well, if you want to, we're going to put that there.
Right.
So that was one of the things that I saw that was the intent when they put this together in the first place. What I would take as the intent. So I know that we got argued back and forth and everybody can make their case on what it is that it says. I would just like to see something that's absolute. We don't have to question it. You don't have to have a second floor, or you need to have a second floor, absolutely, one way or the other.
Well, let's take a straw poll here, just so we can try and move forward. There's 4 people here. If we add some more, we'll have more. How many of us think that there should be in the code some sort of fixed requirement that, at least under some circumstances, there would have to be 2 floors?
Yeah.
So 3? Okay.
I think
So then-
I think that's the intent right now.
Okay.
And it was, as Brian said last, when we were having our training session, it was the sentiment of the public input that the downtown area be two-story.
Okay, so moving on that then, and I think that we would want to discuss then, if there's at least 3 votes out of the 5 that we've currently got on the commission, to have at least some requirement, that at least in some circumstances, there's a 2-story requirement, what would be the exceptions to that? So that we can start conceptually being able to craft some changes.
Well, what if, here's a what if, the chocolate factory down here on First Street caught fire and the building had to be replaced. So now you've got, say we've written the new requirement for 2-story, so we've got all these 1-stories all along, and all of a sudden you've got this monolith stuck in the middle of it.
I think our non-conforming would allow them to rebuild without being 2-story.
There's a chapter in
If
there.
destroyed by fire or
They can
natural disaster or something.
They
So
can
there's-
rebuild as they were grandfathered in.
I'm not saying that you guys as staff are advocating this, but can you maybe throw out some concepts? If we were to establish that there is some 2-story requirement with some exceptions, what could you envision those exceptions being to maybe start the conversation?
Well, we already mentioned the one, and that came up at the library, is if it appears from a pedestrian standpoint outside of the building, if its general appearance is similar to a 2-story building. And the way you do that primarily is the height and windows, the fenestration. And that's exactly what they did with the library. Somebody probably really wouldn't know from outside that it wasn't a 2-story building. But once they went inside, they'd see it wasn't. And so, but it depends on which point of view you have, whether that's fully doing what the purpose of a two-story requirement is in the downtown. That full intensity of use isn't fully being utilized when you don't really have two stories, but it's meeting other aspects in the visual continuity and the walls of buildings up to the sidewalk that you're trying to give. It gives the ambience that you're looking for just as much, having that building as a true two-story building. Just doesn't have the floor area with the intensity of use quite the same. And so that would be one example. And another would be what percentage of the second story needs to be two stories. We have, like, can it be any amount, as similar to the memory care facility? They did the bare minimum that a stair could lead up in one room upstairs. And so they had met the two-story requirement that we were saying was the intent of the code back when they went in. And so they met it. Some people have argued, well, that's ridiculous. Shouldn't it be the same square footage as on the first floor total? Or does it really need to be? Why not have some flexibility? Why not allow some creativeness of the architects and such? And if they provide 50% of the upper floor of what's on the lower floor, up to 50% or lower or higher is acceptable, whatever the percentage is. I don't really have any feel for that. To me, you're just drawing a number out of the air.
Is there any thoughts about that? I mean, I could certainly support some sort of two-story requirement if, maybe, to change Brian's words a little bit, if you meet some sort of a height, if you're over some sort of a height requirement, or, I personally don't like the appearance one, because that's very, very subjective.
Yeah.
But if if your building exceeds some certain height formula or something like that, then you have to have two stories. Is that concept that people like?
Well, I'm generally in favor of, of having something that is black and white, and I've favored the two-story requirement in the past. But the more I hear things going back and forth, I would like to see some sort of flexibility, and I keep coming back to your example of the chocolate factory. Even though I know that if it burned down, there's some exceptions for that, but I come back to the Canby rental folks down there, where a second story just simply doesn't make sense. So we have to try and fit a square peg in a round hole, so to speak. And it just doesn't make sense. As much as I'd like to be rigid about put a second story on your Canby rental space, that it's simply.
The only thing, to me, the second story in a lot of cases would be a residential apartments or a condo or something like that would make a lot of sense. And I think that in the future is going to be, as we're seeing in the big cities, more and more of where things are going, because you're cramming more people into the same square miles of area, and the only thing you can do is go up.
The one concern that I have with the two-story requirement in general is if you have that, does it create a lot of extra costs for somebody, particularly in consideration of things like ADA compliance? Then if you've got, one conference room in a corner, or, one extra office, above your store or whatever.
Right, does it warrant the
Didn't
cost
need
of
an
an
elevator, I
elevator?
mean, you can basically, depending on, how you basically would need an elevator.
Sure.
If you're like a retail or a,
What would it look like if we just eliminated a requirement, period? And that we had, if somebody, whether it's the library or a drugstore or any, and really is that,
That's a good question. I mean, you could just eliminate the requirement altogether, and you would still have potential of a unique downtown in that you allow a higher floor count than anywhere else in town. But you're not mandating that they build up to that higher floor count. And it's really the market and the price of land that determines whether they're going to build up or not.
and that's why I was not necessarily wanting to require that we have a two-story requirement, is because I think that flexibility is good. So I'm not adamant that we have a two-story requirement. I could live without one if we had some.
Tyler, not to drag this on any longer, I'd really like some time to think about it. I mean, I've had enough discussion on it, but I'd really like some time because these are some really good points that I hadn't considered previously. And I'd really like some time to think about that.
Is that a motion to table?
It is a motion to table this.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
All those in favor of tabling signify by saying aye. Aye.
Now, was that just the two-story? Because we can go ahead, as it sounded like you wanted us to kind of work on a couple of the landscape things.
I would like some text on the landscape to be drafted up.
Okay.
Doesn't have, if you guys have too much on permits, doesn't have to be next month. Maybe in the next couple of
Right.
months, if we can just have a little bit of text on those, just a short handful of things,
Okay.
and some language changes. That'd be great. Okay. Then, we have no citizen input tonight. This is no one here. We have no final decisions to approve the language of. Item number 6, the minutes. I would like to, unless there's any objection, I would like to ask staff to move the minutes, approval of the past minutes up to the second item of business each meeting, rather than later on, just so we can recap those and a little bit refresher when we have to go through the minutes. Is there any objection to that? Brian, do you guys have any staff objection or reason that
I
we
don't think
shouldn't or
so.
couldn't do that?
Nope.
Okay, that'd be great. So approval of minutes.
I would like to move that we approve the minutes from the Planning Commission meeting of December 9th and the Planning Commission meeting of January 27th.
Actually, you don't have the 27th available to approve. Laney was working on those and did not get them quite done today, and so they're not in your packet.
Just December 9th.
Right.
No?
Did you bring cookies to kind of bribe us or something like that?
I was just looking for reminders because I thought, how is on one?
But it would help her out. I mean, she could draft them any way she wanted if you went ahead and approved them.
Okay, so let me amend that. I'd like to move that we approve the Planning Commission minutes of December 9th.
Is there any discussion on those minutes? Not hearing any. All in favor of approving those minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, all were in favor. Minutes are approved. Any other items of interest or staff reports?
The item that we do have on your next Planning Commission meeting, February 24th, is the Northwood Estates Phase 2 subdivision approval. And then there is potential that there's going to be a economic development idea proposal to discuss as well. And we have to try to get working on that next couple of days if we're going to get it on there, and we haven't started it yet, so I'm not positive it's going to make it,
But the Northwood Estates,
but that's on there, and it's the first item, so.
Where's that at? Where's Northwood Estates? or-
It's up between Grant and Birch, almost to Territorial. The Phase 2 is further down this way from 10th Avenue up to 13th.
Is
between
it
Grant
that
and
area
Birch.
behind St. Patrick's?
Yes.
On the north?
Directly north of the church there.
Okay. Is that economic development, the rail line, or something totally different?
It has nothing to do with the subdivision. It's a proposal of how we can potentially expedite development review in the industrial park.
Okay, any other staff things?
That's it.
Any items of interest from the commissioners?
I think we covered it tonight.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I
Save me?
would like to move that we adjourn.
Okay,
I would like to second that.
all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting is adjourned.
Our room temperature's